Okay, Mindful Monday, here we go. This video is going to be really focused on differentiating between what is familiar and what is wanted, right? I've noticed in my own personal life that I have confused what is what is something that I want for what is actually just familiar, right? This goes back to the whole matter of family of origin. This is why it's very important to be aware of dynamics and patterns that come from that, right? That result from that. And so, really being able to differentiate between, because, it's kind of like society and culture tends to be very automatic, right? It's like people are expected to do the linear projection of, school, marriage, kids, family, good job, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not here to say that that's right or wrong or good or bad. I'm not. But this is a matter of what it is that you're used to will use you. That's exactly what this has to do with. So there is a difference between what is familiar to a person and what is actually wanted. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean that it's what's actually wanted. And the fascinating thing is that something might be familiar to a person, but it might also be unwanted, right? So say, for instance, something that is familiar to a person is permeable boundaries, right? They learned that from their family of origin. They learned that dynamic, that dysfunctional way of going about a family system, right? That's what's familiar. With that, if that is not seen for what it is and understood that that can actually be a detriment, because that can create unhealthy relationships for a person, right? Boundarylessness or permeable boundaries can really create unhealthy relationships for a person, and that's an issue. That's problematic. So, when you look at everything and you realize that that's what's actually going on, that's familiar, but it's not wanted, because the only time that it will not be wanted is when the person becomes aware of the dynamic. Like, for instance, any dysfunctional or unhealthy dynamic that I've ever become aware of has really shaped my capacity to recognize that, oh, okay, that needs to be healed. It's familiar, but it's not wanted. It's a dynamic that is familiar to, again, here's the word familiar. Familiar comes from family, right? Familiar, family, the family of origin, the dynamic that is created, and that needs to be I personally think that needs to be challenged, because it's important to be aware of that. It's important to be aware of that, because if you're not aware of that, then you're going to continue to repeat the same patterns over and over and over again. So when I look at my own life, permeable boundaries is actually something that is familiar, right? However, that's not going to lead to healthy relationships, because if there are permeable boundaries, then there's usually some dynamic of enmeshment, right? And enmeshment is not true intimacy. Enmeshment is control. Enmeshment is, I need to know everything so that therefore I feel safe knowing or believing that I know everything about a person, right? It's not real. It's it's not a matter of real or not real. It's more a matter of healthy versus unhealthy. That's the difference here. So being able to see yourself and understand where it is that all of this stuff comes from, that is the ticket out, right? But again, going back to familiar versus actually wanted, think about how real that is. Think about how like serious that is. Like, something could be familiar, right? It doesn't mean that it's what's actually wanted, though. It's just familiar. It's like, this is all I've ever known. So, and this is the way that a lot of people live, and it's not good or bad, right or wrong, but it is a difference between healthy and unhealthy. This is also the way that I have lived for a lot of my life. Familiar, right? Oh, well, I was taught that, children are supposed to be raised this way. That is familiar, right? That is an instilled belief over the course of, years, decades, however long, right? So I'm going to go about that way of doing things for raising kids, right? Doesn't mean it's wanted, it just means that it's what's familiar. This is the differentiation here, and this is the really crucial part of this that really transforms the dynamic of how an individual can experience life. It is wild to me, like, as I awaken, as I heal, as I see everything. One of the biggest things of healing is seeing everything for what it is, right? And that requires the taking off of labels and ideas and beliefs and everything, examining the heck out of it, right? Seeing everything for what it is, not what people tell you it is, but for what it is. That, in and of itself, is an art. That is it. So, familiarity does not equate to want, right? Like, somebody might be raised in a system of enmeshment, right? Where there's no actual intimacy. It's all just control, because there's a sense of safety that comes with me controlling you to make sure that I believe I know everything about you, because I can't be okay unless I do. That's not intimacy. That's not. Intimacy is, safe intimacy is creating a space for somebody where you allow them to be themselves and express themselves and allow them to open up to you and be vulnerable and honest as they choose to, right? But for a lot of people, that enmeshment is familiar to them, right? Doesn't mean it's wanted, it just means it's familiar to them. So this is the thing. What a lot of people seek out, and I've been here before, what a lot of people seek out is familiarity, and that is disguised as want. Just because they're used to it. What you're used to will use you. That's how this works. That's how this has always worked. So on this Mindful Monday, what I'm becoming aware of is just because something is familiar does not mean that it's wanted. Knowing how to differentiate between the two and actually be like, oh, okay, that's familiar. That's from family. That's from the family of origin. That's a dynamic that I learned in childhood. I'm used to that. Doesn't mean I want it. It is familiar, but it doesn't mean that I want it. That's what it's all about.